Welcome back to BWI, as Joel said, we just are looking forward to another fantastic day of you guys listening, learning, some great speakers for you. Let me open us up in a word of prayer and we'll dive in. Dear Heavenly Father, we're just so thankful for what we heard yesterday, for what we learned. Father, that your name was proclaimed. Father, that your word, Father, is a fire that can consume, Father, all the things in our lives, in our heart, Father, that are not that are glorifying you. Father, your word is a hammer that can break the chains that bind us. So, Father, I just pray for today, Lord, that you just continue to do work in these students' lives, in our lives, Father, to free us from those things that keep us from being all that you've called us to be. Lord, help us to take what we know and to share it with others. Father, the gospel is such an incredible gift of your grace and your love, and Father, we don't want to hold it in. So, Father, I pray that today we'd not only listen for ourselves, but we'd listen to how we're going to take this information and share it with those who are around us the rest of our lives. In Christ's name, amen. We're going to start today with Jeremy Tedesco. For some of you who were in his panel the other day, you got to hear a little bit from him, but he is the Senior Counsel and Vice President of U.S. Advocacy and Administration for Alliance Defending Freedom, which is ADF. You guys want to check them out sometime. ADF.org is their website. He oversees the implementation of strategic initiatives and advocacy campaigns. He earned his Juris Doctorate from Regent University in 2004, and he has some clients that he's going to bring out with him and tell some stories that you guys want to hear. So welcome, Jeremy Tedesco.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here with you this morning. It's been really an exciting time. This event has really blown me away, just in the depth with which you go into the issues, in your commitment to understanding these tough times we live in. And it's a pleasure for me to be part of helping you think through some of these really tough questions. Probably the toughest one is, how do I live out my Christian faith in a world that is growing increasingly hostile to it? I don't have much time, but I wanted to get three things across to you this morning. Some of these themes we've already talked about in breakout sessions and other things I've talked about. First, the threats to religious freedom in our society are real and they are increasing. Second, despite what you might hear and read about the people involved in these religious freedom battles in the media and online, the people at the center of them are good and decent and honorable people who are living inspirational, Christ-centered lives. You're going to meet a few of them in just a few minutes, and I know you'll be inspired and encouraged by their stories and by their faith. Third, we need heroes to stand in the gap for us and protect our freedoms. These folks over here are heroes, but I think God's going to be calling some of you to be heroes as well. How will you respond when the call comes? When you face the choice we all eventually face in life, will I obey man or God? How will you respond? How will you answer that call? Those are the questions you're here to think about today and during this conference. Before we get further into this discussion, I want to start by showing you some firsthand stories of some of Alliance Defending Freedom's clients who have faced this choice. Can you play the video?
As a kid, the grown-ups used to ask us all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? I told them, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. In 1981, my dream came true. Being one of the first African Americans on the Shreveport Fire Department had significant challenges. After living a life experiencing a lot of discrimination, it gave me a conviction that should I ever be in a position of leadership, that I would never allow anyone to have the same experience I had as a minority. That's why I was so surprised that writing a book for a Christian men Bible study would cause my career to come to an abrupt end.
These tombstones represent the lives that are taken by abortion every single day in the United States of America. This is a personal issue for me. When I found out that our pro-life club on campus was denied, it shot me right back to when I was 16 and I found out that my mom considered aborting me. When we got the news, I was angry. They were denying us the opportunity to express our diverse viewpoint on campus.
Since the physician-assisted suicide law was passed, it certainly brought home the reality that we're in a whole new world in the field of medicine. Being forced to talk to someone about committing suicide and ending their life artificially and having me be complicit with it violates my sense of conscience because my role is to protect life. This is something that really could end my practice. If I'm forced to do this, I won't continue to practice medicine in this state. I would leave my practice. There is no compromise here.
At the end of 2016, there was a state law that was passed that would force pregnancy help centers to refer for abortions. The thought of actually having to give an abortion referral to a young woman was just unbearable. This law is such a violation of my conscience. It's really unthinkable because it really totally erases the whole reason why I'm here, the whole reason why Aid for Women is here.
Five years ago, we were approached by a customer who asked us to print a message that conflicted with my conscience. So we respectfully declined the order, and I had another print shop who would print the same job at the same price, but they ended up going to our local government and they filed a lawsuit against us to try to get us in the future to print shirts that had a message that would conflict with my faith. I received a phone call after I made the decision to decline the message, and a gentleman called and didn't give me his name, and he just asked me, he said, "Are you sure you want to stand for this? Are you sure you're going to hold to your beliefs on this issue? I want to know before we do this." And I just said, I have no option. I said, I can't print that message, and he hung up on me. When that happened, I knew this wasn't going to be a small issue.
Every creative professional has a list of reasons why you would choose a project and why you would decline a project.
And that's true for everyone I work with. But there's a law in Minnesota that would force us to tell stories that conflict with our core beliefs. Preserving freedom of conscience is important for every single person. We don't want anyone to feel or fear that the government will punish them for simply holding an opinion that might be unpopular.
One of the great joys I have is leading a Christ-centered university, a faith-based university. This legislation, if it would have passed in its original form, would have ended up setting ourselves up for the possibility of being sued just for practicing what we believe.
Ministry is not just about being on a pulpit, but rather serving a community. So our church recently bought a property that we are developing to help victims of domestic violence. All of a sudden, this law came out. That was going to make it very difficult for us to be able to serve these women that have been abused. So we worked with ADF to defend the freedoms that the church had.
Everybody in our country should care about right of conscience in all aspects of our public life. When someone else comes and dictates that you must do something against your conscience, it brings us back to some of the worst times in history. Everybody should care about this because if we're the first or some of the first to be targeted, it is assured that other professions will eventually be targeted.
Religious freedom helps everyone. It's not just freedom for me, it's freedom for everyone.
It's bigger than just this one person. It's about the freedoms for all of us to live by our conscience.
We were meant to be free. The world is a place that flourishes, that grows under freedom.
As I think you can see from that video, the threats to religious freedom from the government, to religious viewpoints the government doesn't like, are broad and serious. They're impacting all sectors of society. You've got college students in that video, doctors, pro-life pregnancy centers, business owners, religious institutions and schools and the church. And the reality is all these institutions, individuals, are under threat because in America today, a polite persecution is taking hold. And it's one that stigmatizes and penalizes those who hold orthodox Christian beliefs on life, marriage, and human sexuality. It's simply the reality of the cultural context in which we live. Now, before I get to introducing to our clients, I want to talk about what I think is one of the most emblematic cases of the time on this, and that's the Jack Phillips case, Masterpiece Cake Shop. That was a case that my law firm, Alliance Defending Freedom, just won on behalf of Jack Phillips at the United States Supreme Court 7-2 in June of 2018. But what I want to tell you about the case is not really about everything you typically hear about the case. I want to tell you about who Jack Phillips is. I want to blow up the stereotype and the caricature, because if you open up almost any article about the case, you're going to read a typical stereotypical caricature of the type of person that people think would be involved in a case like this. But I can tell you that Jack Phillips meets none of those definitions, neither of the people to my left. Jack is a humble and caring and loving man. Every aspect of his life is impacted by his faith, including the way he runs his shop. You can see it in so many different ways. I know Jack very well. I've litigated the case with him for 6 years and consider him a friend. I often tell people they'd be lucky to have him as a neighbor and blessed to call him a friend. But the people that come into his shop, every single one that comes into his shop is his friend. You can tell when they walk through the door. If he doesn't know them, he's going to know them well enough for them to call him a friend by the time they leave. These are people that he's really experienced almost every important event in their life with them. He's created a custom cake for the birth of their child, and then he creates other cakes to celebrate other events in their lives, and then he creates the custom cake when they graduate as well. Jack is deeply invested in the people that come in his shop, and it's not just the paying customers. I mean, this is one of the things about Jack that I love so much. He's no respecter of persons. The people who can't pay, he's got essentially a ministry out of his shop to homeless people in the community. He greets them with the same smile, the same cup of coffee, the same pastries, that he greets the people who come in to buy custom cakes from him. He has directed homeless women who have been pregnant to shelters for care. He constantly reaches out to that community and loves on them. And one of my favorite stories to tell about Jack's case is the day that his case was granted by the Supreme Court, which was almost 19 long weeks that he waited, which you don't understand, but that is a long time to wait to hear from the Supreme Court on whether they will hear your case. Usually it's very quick, 2-3 weeks, and you know or you don't know. But this was drawn out, and on the day he finally found out the news, he was sitting in his shop, sitting in front of his computer, refreshing the website that shows you whether your case has been granted or denied. And he got the grant information. He saw that his case was going to the Supreme Court, and there was nobody in the shop to share this information with, except for the one homeless man that he has developed a friendship with. So he turned over to him and he said, "Hey, I'm going to the Supreme Court." And his homeless buddy said, "Hey, I've got a court date on Wednesday." And that's just how Jack is, and it's so natural for him to have shared this story and shared this moment with his homeless buddy who happened to be going to court as well. And so, the thing about Jack, the other thing I want you to understand about Jack is his religious faith is baked deep into his character across all aspects of his life. When he opened his shop back in 1993, he said, "I'm going to make custom cakes for the glory of God. And I'm going to use my artistic talents in a way that honors Christ." And so from the outset, he had cakes he wasn't going to create. And they included anti-American cakes and cakes that included alcohol, cakes that celebrated Halloween. One of the things that he developed over time, he did not create any cakes that disparaged people. He started getting increasing requests to create cakes with disparaging messages about gays and lesbians. He declined those. So across the board, he's always thinking, what's the message of the cake? Am I being asked to create something that's going to dishonor God. The cake that he declined, a cake celebrating a same-sex marriage, is just another one of those cakes that fits into the category of cakes that he just won't create because he disagrees with the message, because he doesn't want to be put in a position of using his artistic talents to celebrate those events. And that denial is the only one that ever got him in trouble, and it got him into a lot of trouble. From the moment he said no back in 2012, he's suffered immensely. And the vile phone calls and hateful phone calls that filled his shop, really for 6 years at different times, have been unspeakable. I wouldn't even tell you what people have said to him. He's suffered very credible death threats. On one of them, he actually had to tell his daughter and granddaughter, who were commonly in the shop with him, to go hide in the back, and had to call the police because the threat was so credible. He lost 40% of his business. He had a very thriving business in the wedding context. He lost 40% of his business because of what the state of Colorado did to him. And that had enormous impact on him. He went from 10 employees to 4. His shop is really a shell. It became a shell of its former self. The great news is that we won the case at the United States Supreme Court 7-2. The Supreme Court said that the government cannot be hostile to people of faith in our society. And I think most importantly, the Supreme Court said that people who hold religious views like Jack Phillips about marriage and oppose same-sex marriage need to be given tolerance and respect in our society. It's not tolerance and respect for the government to come in and, through heavy-handed measures, force people to act or speak in ways that are contrary to their core convictions. Yet that's what Jack Phillips faced. You'll find out soon that's what Carl and Angel Larsen faced as well. The chief got fired because of standing for his beliefs on marriage. And so, the other thing I want to point out about Jack Phillips is that even though we won the case, and it was a great victory for religious freedom, Colorado, the state we had to sue to protect his rights, turned around 3 weeks, a little bit over 3 weeks after they lost the case at the Supreme Court, and sued Jack again because he declined to create a cake celebrating a gender transition. A customer came in and I asked him for a cake that was blue on the inside, pink on the outside, and Jack said, that's a message I can't celebrate through my art that I create, my custom artwork. And a complaint was filed, and even though Colorado had just been told, you have to respect this man's religious beliefs, they filed another lawsuit against him. So we're back in court with Jack. And that's not to say that this is a fruitless endeavor. It's to say that we must be eternally vigilant as we defend these freedoms, because we know that those that oppose us and our ability to continue to live our faith out in the public square are opposed to us being able to do so. And Colorado's 3-week, just a few days over 3 weeks turnaround after losing at the Supreme Court and suing Jack again is a perfect example of that. Well, with that, I want to get to our clients that we have here today, because they are the stars of the show. Brief introduction, we've got Chief Kelvin Cochran, former fire chief of the city of Atlanta, who was fired for his faith. And I'll let him tell a story through some questions and answers from me. Well, I won't give the answers, I'll give the questions. And then we have Carl and Angel Larsen, who own a video production company up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. They are involved in litigation right now that's ongoing against the state of Minnesota. The state says they have the power to force them to express messages through the films they create that violate their religious convictions. And so let's unpack these cases a little bit, folks. Carl, I'll start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the video production industry?
Yeah, good morning. I was just like you when I started. I was right on the edge of college, going on spring break with my family, and I had a brand new Macintosh computer, and it was the first version where you could actually plug the computer and the camera together. And so I made, very first video I made is of my little niece, took it on spring break and realized, like, I want to do this. This is incredible. I love creating things. Simultaneously, Angel and I were both going to a college ministry, Fargo, North Dakota, and it changed our lives. And so I very quickly said, this is a platform, this is an opportunity to take what I'm learning about Jesus and tell as many people as possible who are willing to listen. And not many people were doing it at the time, and it turned into a full-time career for us.
It's awesome. So it wasn't something that was a passion of yours when you were 5 years old.
No, I was a physics major actually in college. So I loved this was great because the way that I am, I took as many art classes as I could in high school and as many math and science classes as I could as possible. And doing what I do now is the ultimate combination of that. It's supremely technical and creative all at the same time.
It's awesome. Angel, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your family? Tell us about your kids and who comprises the Larsen 10?
Larsen
I don't know.
tribe.
The Larsen tribe.
We have 8 children. 2, yeah, ooh, they're an audible gasp. I love it. Woo! Yeah, I do. I have 8 children. 2 are adopted from Ethiopia, and 5 are biological, and 1 we are actually helping a single dad raise her, and we've been doing that for the last 5 years. And so I homeschool 7 out of 8. 1 goes to our church's classical school, and it's been really an awesome journey. I would have never guessed that I would have had 8 children back when we were dating, but God has different plans for our lives.
It's great. It's a vibrant family. I've been around them. I don't know how they have energy to be here today, quite frankly. So, Carl, tell us a little bit about Telescope Media Group and just what it is and also how you came up with that name.
Yeah. So, back when I was in college and really discovering this is what I want to do with my life, we were both involved in this college ministry, and so when I wasn't doing my physics homework, I generally found myself reading John Piper sermons in the college library. This was how nerdy I was.
I never saw him.
So I was so excited about what the Bible taught and who Jesus was, and when it came to the time, I went full-time on church staff, then worked in a video production company, and then we started our own because we wanted to take this passion for excellence and communicating who Jesus is, and also interacting with people who are outside of that realm. And so we started our own business and called it Telescope Media Group. And the idea is, John Piper wrote this book years ago, saying that we need to magnify God through what we do. That's our call as believers. And so when the Psalm said, magnify the Lord with me, there's either 2 ways we can look at that. Either we're magnifying something. Magnification, you're either making something small look big, like a microscope, or God is great. God is beautiful, large, loving, incredible, and we want to see him more like he really is. So we've said from day one on our website that we want to magnify God like a telescope. We want to tell the stories and create content that is consistent with those messages, and that's what we've been doing for about the last 10 years.
That's great. Chief, let's switch gears over to you now and just tell us a little bit about growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana, and what that experience was like for you in the early years.
Well, good morning, first of all. I was born not far from here in Shreveport, Louisiana in the early 60s in a very poor family. My dad left my mother with 6 children. We were already poor, and we were evicted from a government projects, and we moved a few blocks over to a back alley and a shotgun house. And of course, being from the South, I don't have to explain to you what a shotgun house is. But my 3 big brothers and I, we slept in the same bed. My 2 little sisters slept in the same room in another little bed. We were on welfare and food stamps. My big brothers were on the free lunch program at school. Some of the utilities were always off because my mother never had enough money to keep all the utilities on. At the end of the month, all the groceries were gone most of the time, and we survived on mayonnaise sandwiches, and we drank sugar water until the next welfare checks or food stamps came. When I was a kid, 3 things stood out to me as a 5-year-old. I didn't want to be poor when I grew up. I wanted a family, and by that I mean I wanted to be a husband with a wife and have children, and stay with my children and my wife because I saw how difficult it was on my mother. And then one day in that alley, the lady across the alley from us, her house caught fire. And when I saw the Shreveport firefighters that day, I was convicted. I wanted to be a firefighter when I grew up. And the grown-ups taught us that in our country, all of our dreams would come true if we believe in and have faith in God. If we go to school and get a good education, they told us if we respected grown-ups and treated other children like we wanted to be treated, that all of our dreams were going to come true. And I believed them. They raised us on faith and patriotism, and what they taught us actually caused all of my dreams to come true.
It's great. So you saw the Shreveport Fire Department guys, it inspired you at a young age, and then you actually became a member of the Shreveport Fire Department. But there were difficult experiences that you had there that kind of informed your career and how you led moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about that and just how it impacted your leadership and management style as you entered into your career?
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, I didn't notice that day that all of the firefighters were white. It didn't matter to me. In 1981, when I became a firefighter, I was one of the first African Americans on the Shreveport Fire Department, and we were not welcomed. So I experienced the first 2 years of my experience, well, throughout the career there, but mostly the first 2 years as a Shreveport firefighter, I experienced the horrors of racism in ways that you could never think of. It was just constant racial slurs, constant racial jokes. There was a bed designated for the black firefighter so that everyone would identify with that bed and avoid sleeping on it on the other shifts. I was on C shift, and there was a B, and C shift, so you had to sleep in the black firefighter bed so that the firefighters on A and B shift would know that bed and avoid sleeping in that bed. Some fire departments and fire stations in that day even had designated plates, forks, and spoons. I was at a fire station where the captain made me wash the dishes in nearly scalding hot water. It was a terrible thing, but I believe that the same values that I was raised on as a kid would get me through those difficult times, that if I continued to have faith in God, continue to learn the job, respect the authority of the Shreveport Fire Department, and treat the other firefighters like I wanted to be treated, I believe that I would one day experience camaraderie and justice, and by the grace of God, it eventually came to pass.
So let's tie that together to the way that you approached, once you got into leadership in fire departments, how did your experience in Shreveport with race discrimination impact the way you led?
Well, when I became the first African American fire chief in Shreveport, Louisiana, one of my convictions as a Christian was, I've got to create a culture where everybody looks forward to coming to work every day, and there are no barriers that would hinder them from giving the best that they have to offer to one another and to the citizens. And so our goal was to use the diversity of the department to create what we called in Shreveport a philosophy of how we would conduct ourselves as a fire department, and conversely how we would treat the public, really to establish a system of justice, compassion, and equity. When I became the fire chief in Shreveport, let me just say it this way, as Christian leaders, we have an obligation to institute a culture that is consistent with the preamble and the Constitution of our country. And as believers, we have an obligation to institute a culture that's consistent with our beliefs and our faith of justice, equity, and compassion. And so I did that in Shreveport. I did that in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, we called it an ism-free climate. No racism, sexism, territorialism, favoritism, nepotism. No isms, that the predominant ism in our department would be professionalism. And I was grateful enough to have enough collaboration and diversity in a group of people that put together what we call the Atlanta Fire Rescue Doctrine to implement such a culture.
It's great. It's great. I love that you learned that. You took those hard experiences and turned them into positive and good for the fire departments. So Carl and Angel, let's go back to you. Carl, talk a little bit about film creation and just the art of it and how it's so deeply personal.
Well, what we do is incredibly personal. Oftentimes it's long hours, it's time spent away from family. But there's no way of separating the artist from the art. As soon as it's created, I just was on an 8-day shoot coming before here, and every single one of my shots looks like my work. People hire us because we have the opportunity to tell their stories in a way that they aren't able to do it. And so it's incredibly investing, it's incredibly personal, and we're always going to tell it in a way that's consistent with our beliefs, because there's no way of separating the art from the artist.
Yeah, and so what got you into trouble in Minnesota was your desire to tell marriage stories consistent with your religious beliefs. And the state saying that they have to create stories, tell stories about marriage that violate their beliefs if they want to tell stories that celebrate biblical marriage. But the first question I want to ask you is, why do you want to tell marriage stories? What's your passion or what's your drive? What draws you to those? And that's a question for both of you guys.
Well, we're actually passionate about marriage. Our marriage rocks. Like, I love this man, and I want every single one of you to have the opportunity to have an amazing marriage. So we bring couples into our house. We do marriage counseling. We do shepherding, discipling. We have college students over to our house frequently, and it was just an integral part of our life. And when we started looking at the stories that we wanted to tell, God was pushing us we wanted to tell marriage stories because we didn't feel that those stories were being told very well in our culture. And so we looked into that, and this is when we found that we were in conflict with the law in Minnesota.
And so, Carl, you've also got a theological riff that you do on why you're drawn to marriage, and I want you to share that too.
Yeah, so as Christians who believe what we believe, we believe the Bible, we want to live it out in every aspect of our lives, which is why we're hospitable, which is why we try to live in a way consistent with the Bible. All of our lives are wrapped up in our Christian identity. And so as we've been working on our marriage, we've also seen the great story, the whole story throughout the Bible is that it starts in the garden with a wedding, and it ends with a marriage celebration, Feast of the Lamb. And Jesus calls us, as believers, he calls us his bride, and he's the bridegroom. And marriage gives us language to understand the love of God. And that's why we're attracted to these stories. As creative professionals, we want to tell the stories that we're naturally attracted to. We want to tell stories that are true, truly true, the great story. And that's why we want to do marriage stories, because it's an opportunity to talk about not only meet the needs of a client and create a great product, but to talk about the realities of the world, talk about the nature of God. And those are the things that really get us going.
So let's stay with you for one more, and then we'll go back to Chief. You want to get into marriage stories. You're driven by your religious faith to do it, to tell these stories. You run into a problem. So just explain what the problem is and what you decided to do about it.
The problem is we want to tell stories about marriage from a biblical point of view. We want to tell that story. In Minnesota, the law says that we have to tell all conceptions of marriage. And so there's certain stories. We work with everyone. I regularly work with people who are different from me, and we work incredibly well together. This summer I had an opportunity to work on a fashion shoot in LA and New York, and a number of large TV production events where there's people all across the board who are on the crew. So clients, gay crew members, doesn't matter. We work with everyone. It's always about the message. And the message that Minnesota was saying is that we have to violate our Christian beliefs about what marriage is, the nature of God, if we want to tell the stories that are consistent with our beliefs. And that's where we ran into the legal issue. Steep fines, 90 days in jail. And so we really ran into having to ask the question, what do we do? This is incredibly hostile.
Yeah, let me just reinforce that. If Carl and Angel enter the wedding industry, Minnesota says they can fine them up to $25,000 in punitive fines, throw them in jail for up to 90 days if they decline to create films promoting an idea of marriage that violates their beliefs. And so that's why they're in court. That's a choice the government shouldn't be able to put to anyone, regardless of whether their beliefs are religious or not. Forcing people to choose between their fundamental beliefs and the ability to earn a living and to exercise their First Amendment rights isn't something the government should have the power to do. Yet that's the situation we're in and the situation Carl and Angel are in. So Chief, let's go back to you. I'm going to fill in a couple details. They're pretty exciting details, though. Chief ascends to the highest levels of his profession. And I mean it when I say that. It's actually true that he had the highest position possible in the United States government when it comes to fire chief. What's the name of the position, Chief?
The United States Fire Administrator.
United States Fire Administrator, and President Obama appointed chief to that in 2009?
Yes, 2009.
And even was confirmed by the Senate, so you didn't have the problems Kavanaugh had, it doesn't sound like, which is good. But so Chief is at the highest levels of his profession. Gets called actually back to Atlanta to serve there and accepts that call. And that's where this conflict for you really starts. So what happened when you got back to Atlanta? What got you into the point of ultimately losing your job for your faith?
Well, I've been a Christian most all of my life. I was baptized at a very early age and just lived out my faith. Had a little rocky period in my college years and my early 20s, but I never lost sight of my faith in Christ. And so I've lived out my faith my entire life. I was conducting a men's Bible study at my church that led to me writing a book for Christian men. The title of the book is a very familiar question in Genesis chapter 3, verse 11. The title is, "Who Told You That You Were Naked?" And in the book, it deals with Christian men who struggle with condemnation. So I talked about some of the challenges Christian men have in our walk of faith, and one is sexual transgressions. And so I simply went back and explained the biblical view of why God created sex, and that God did create sex. He intended it to be between a man and a woman, and he intended it to be done in holy matrimony. Holy matrimony, because he wanted the earth to be populated with little Adams and little Eves for generations, and that any sex outside of that context of God's purpose and God's design for holy matrimony was sinful. A firefighter who read the book showed those 4 or 5 paragraphs to an openly gay Atlanta City Council member who complained to the mayor of the city. I was initially suspended for 30 days to see if I had discriminated against anyone based upon my biblical views. Their thorough investigation yielded that I had never discriminated against anyone. However, I was still terminated anyway.
So once you were terminated, you ended up in a 4-year lawsuit. And talk a little bit about just the trials that you've been through, going through that 4-year process.
Well, it's been, I call it a fiery trial. But the plus side of it is when I was faced with the decision to resign or be terminated, I knew a resignation would mean compromising and cowarding out on what I believed. And termination would mean I would have to fight. And so I didn't know how I was going to fight. I just knew that I had to fight it because I didn't feel that as a believer I would be glorifying God by resigning, by throwing in the towel, and that I would set every other government employee up for the same failure should I cave in to the pressure. But thanks be to God, when I was terminated, I discovered that God had a law firm in the earth called Alliance Defending Freedom, and they not only provided excellence in legal services, but they are a ministry that met all of not only my legal needs, but provided the ministry comfort that me and my family needed over these last 4 years of a major journey in our life. And thanks to God, on October the 15th, the city of Atlanta decided to settle my case. And the most important thing is the judge ruled that the policy that the city of Atlanta used to terminate me was unconstitutional. Now no government employee well, it's not that it won't happen again, but the ruling makes it so that other government employees will not have to live in fear, that if they are discovered to believe the Bible regarding marriage and sexuality, that their careers would be in jeopardy.
That's right. We've got a published decision from, that's great. We've got a published decision saying that have violated the chief's rights to fire him. The city of Atlanta, for further deterrence effect, had to pay a $1.2 million settlement to end the case. And so there are fire departments across the nation and other government agencies taking notice of that, and that's a really good thing for all of us. Angel, I want to come to you now on the question of how people respond to your lawsuit and how people mischaracterize and misunderstand you and the Larsen family. There's this, we talked about this at the beginning, the stereotypes, the caricature, you're closed-minded, you close yourself off from the world. Can you just explain to us how that's absolutely not true for you guys and how you actually push out and reach out to bring diverse people into your lives?
So because we have 8 children, buying 10 plane tickets to go anywhere is not happening. And so we decided very early on to invite the world to our table. We have a 12-foot table, and underneath it, you get to sign your name as a remembrance of being in our home. And right now we have over 1,000 names that have come and have joined and had a meal with us. We live in a college town, and so frequently, twice a month and every holiday, we stay home and we invite college students into our home and we love on them. And a lot of times they're the international students because they have no place to go. And many times we've met an international student of, I've been in America for 3 years and never been in an American home. And your house is just so warm and loving and inviting. We just love it here. And so when those people write those very negative, hostile things, or we get sent emails or called, it deeply hurts because we love all people. We love bringing them into our home. We love our kids to be able to experience culture and different people from all over the world. And then it's this amazing thing to build community. It's just makes me warm just to think of what my kids get to experience every week at our house.
Yeah, and so, this is one of those things about these cases that you can't believe what you read sometimes. It's really hard to penetrate social media with the truth of who these people are and the kind of conviction and authenticity with which they live their lives. But I want you to see that on display so you can understand that we're really dealing with good and decent people who are just trying to live faithful Christian lives, like all of us are, and paying consequences for that. Carl, I wanted to ask you, people will question, you didn't have to get into the wedding industry. Why did you file the lawsuit? It wasn't an action you necessarily had to take. What motivates that decision? Why did you decide to step into the line of fire?
As followers of Jesus, our command is to love your neighbor and to do that to the best of your abilities. And so for us, we see this, what the government is telling us is you must speak a message that you disagree with. You must violate your core convictions. And I know in a room like this, putting myself in where I was in high school, I didn't hold to the degree of conviction that I hold to now. I didn't believe the Bible in the way that I believe it now. And that's okay. So as a side note, I want you to know that even if you don't agree with our case or the way that we're going about it, you should be for us, for our case, because freedom is a good thing for everyone. Even if you disagree about same-sex marriage and our biblical conviction on it, you should be for freedom. We don't want anyone to be forced to promote anything that violates their conscience. That's what's at the core of this. And we believe that's loving your neighbor. We don't want anyone to be forced to promote or silence themselves. Those were our options. We either had to promote something that we don't believe in, or we had to be silent on a topic that is central to our beliefs as Christians. So we believe that's loving our neighbor, protecting freedom for everyone to live according to what they truly believe.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit at our breakout sessions yesterday, but you have to extract this debate when you're talking to other people about it from the same-sex marriage context. It helps you to have the conversation, to talk about freedom for everybody, and to talk about how, if Carl and Angel Larsen lose this case, we all lose it, because if the government has this power over one issue, over their lives, it has that power over all issues in all of our lives. and our freedoms travel together. So if we want freedom for people, if we want freedom for ourselves, we have to extend it to people who we disagree with, especially on deeply contentious issues that are really important to the social order, like what is the meaning of marriage? Chief, I'm going to ask you to kind of close us out with, you talk a lot about lessons you've learned through the process of going through this. So I just wanted you to get an opportunity to convey those 5 lessons that you've learned to the students.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, my fellow young Americans, my fellow young brothers and sisters in Christ, it's not a matter of if you're going to be tested as to whether you have the faith and courage to stand for Jesus Christ. It's just a matter of when will the test comes. Here's the 5 things that I've learned through my fiery trial that I've gone through in the last 4 years. The first one is God always prepares his sons and daughters to face the test as to whether they really will truly stand for Christ or not. He always prepares us for it. So be confident that when you face that test, know that God has decided that you are prepared to pass that test. Number 2 is the toughest of the 5, and that is there are worldly consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Jesus Christ. Around the world today, there are worldly consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ. It is risky to be openly Christian today around the world. One quick testimony is about a college campus in Africa where Christian and Muslim students were known to attend. A radical group of Islamists stormed the college campus, separated the Muslim students from the Christian students, and told the Christian students, you're all going to die. The only way you get to live is to reject Jesus Christ. And 125 Christian African kids college kids refused to reject their faith in Jesus Christ. About the number in this section right here in the middle. Can you imagine that whole section right there in the middle, refusing to reject Jesus Christ and being gunned down and dying on the spot? There are worldly consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ. The third thing is there are kingdom consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ, and the kingdom consequences are always greater than the worldly consequences. Jesus made a promise that whatever you lose standing for my name, I will restore it 100 times greater than whatever it was you lost. And Jesus Christ wants American Christians to be living proof of that promise. The fourth thing is, for the son or daughter of God who has the courage and faith to stand, God is glorified in the eyes of the persecutors. They always see God in a way that they would have never seen it when we demonstrate the courage and faith to stand. The person being persecuted gets to see a side of God that they had never seen before when we have the courage and faith to stand. And then the fifth thing that I've learned is for the son or daughter of God who has the courage and faith to stand, their life of blessing will go exceeding abundantly above all they could ever ask or think. It always happens throughout the scripture. Job was restored twice as much as he lost. Joseph, through all of his trials, became the prime minister of Egypt. Daniel became a prime minister. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were promoted to governors. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who raised her as a daughter, became a prime minister. There's something about these prime minister government positions that God places his people to. There's always blessings. Jesus, the ultimate testimony, has the name above every name, because when God's children have the courage and faith to stand, their life goes to a whole nother level that they would have never imagined. So that's the 5 lessons. I pray that God will give you the courage and faith to apply them when your day of testing comes.
Thank you. I can think of no better way to finish. Let's give him a round of applause.